It looks like we are live. Hello. Wait, it says we're live, and now it says ready to go live. Let me try it. Let me confirm on my phone. Hello, Tom Levecki here with the latest edition of the New Theory podcast. I'm also going to stream this on Mobsters Inc. We have a very special guest today. Let me just see if it's. I think it's live streaming on. All right, there we go. We are live. So I got a great guest today, Michael Cannell, who's the author of a fantastic book. Really excited to have him on. The book is Blood and the Badge: Two Mafia Cops, Killer Cops, a scandal that shocked the nation. Michael Cannell, welcome to the New Theory podcast. How you doing today, man?
Hey Tom, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you.
So I don't do a lot of lives, and as you know, I'm typically in studio. But I wanted to connect with you before we lost too much time. Why did you write the book? Let's start with that. What compelled you to write a book about the Mafia Cops?
Yeah, good question. I mean, my previous book was called A Brotherhood Betrayed. It was a true story about Murder Inc., and in particular about Abe Relez, the man who was the head of the assassination squad in the 1930s and 40s. And, I kind of was just working in this mafia space. I had written a book about the origins of criminal profiling before that. And I was aware of this story about Eppolito and Caracappa. That story about these two corrupt cops who were secretly on the mafia payroll was not exactly a secret. It had been written about before. Some of the investigators who had worked on the case had written a book. There were other books that touched on it. I pitched it to my publisher this way. I said, the definitive book about Eppolito and Caracappa has never been written, and a little bit of time has passed, and I think people will talk to me about it now that wouldn't have talked about it before.
Okay.
And I can honestly say that I think I fulfilled that promise. A lot of people talk to me, a lot of people who had never talked to a writer or a reporter before, and even the investigators who had worked on that previous book. They helped me a lot, and I spent a lot of time talking to them, and they acknowledged that the book I wrote is really the definitive story of Eppolito and Caracappa, which I think we can say is the darkest episode in NYPD history, if not the nation's policing as well.
Well, so hold on. I want to unpack this a little bit. So to me, they seem like two different guys. Caracappa was very neat, put together, thinner in stature, seemed decorated, where Eppolito was, his father was a wise guy, or I think his grandfather, some of the wise guys in his family, you'll correct me in a minute. Kind of like, as you say in Italian, like a scustamod, like a heavier guy, like kind of sloppy. And so you kind of expected that from him, but they were very close. And if you could kind of similarities and differences between the two, what you found in your research.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. They were opposites in every imaginable way. They were sometimes successful partners are opposites, right? I mean, they were like Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
Eppolito was this big, heavy, sloppy, loud, boastful, vulgar, boorish character. And as you said, his best friend and partner, Stephen Caracappa, was immaculately dressed, quiet to the point of being almost mute, circumspect, always watching, taking in what was happening. But they worked somehow as complementary parts as a team. And they were also complementary parts in the sense that while Eppolito was a street detective, Stephen Caracappa was promoted to the major case squad, the elite unit that was housed in NYPD headquarters. And this was significant because within Major Case, Caracappa was responsible for compiling all the police reports and all the information. So he knew everything about the investigations of organized crime, and not just the NYPD, but also the FBI and the DEA.
Task force, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So as in that capacity, he was in a position to sell or pass along sensitive information to the Lucchese crime family, who was under investigation, who was about to be arrested, whose phones were tapped. Most importantly, who in the mafia ranks was an informant. And then once Caracappa had identified the informants, they were paid a bonus to facilitate the abduction or the murder of those rats or informants.
So hold on, I want to, because there's a lot going on in that, right? So my first question is, who had the initial point of contact? Was it Caracappa or Ippolito, and who was that with specifically, as far as you know?
Yeah, I mean, it happened this way. There was at that time a drug dealer in Brooklyn and Staten Island known as Bert Kaplan.
Yeah.
And Bert Kaplan, it's not really accurate for me to call him a drug dealer. He was a major mover of drugs, major mover of drugs. And he spent his entire life in and out of prison. He was a degenerate gambler and constantly involved in creative criminal schemes in order to pay off his gambling debts.
Yeah.
He was in prison one time in the mid 80s, and his best friend in prison happened to be Louis Ippolito's cousin. And as they're getting out of prison, Bert Kaplan's friend, whose name was Santora, said, "When we get out, if you ever need my cousin to help you out,
interesting.
If you need somebody in the police department to do me a favor, my cousin will do anything." I mean, significant that he said anything. And Bert Kaplan dismissed this. He didn't want to get involved with a corrupt police officer, a corrupt detective. However, a little while later, Bert Kaplan had coerced a diamond dealer named Israel Greenwald to sell stolen treasury bonds in London. And the FBI was tipped off, and they grabbed Israel Greenwald when he was coming back into JFK Airport. And Israel Greenwald, who may or may not have known that these treasury bonds were stolen, he started to cooperate with the FBI. And so Bert Kaplan now had this problem on his hands. And his solution to the problem was to contact his old jailhouse friend, Santora, and say, "Hey, that cousin of yours that you mentioned, the cop, do you think he would do a favor for me?" And so Ippolito and Caracappa stopped Israel Greenwald on his way home to Rockaway Beach from his office in the Diamond District, and they claimed that he was being pulled over. They were pulling him over on I think it was like his car resembled a stolen car or something that they had trumped up. And they took him to a garage on Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn and killed him and buried him there. And so now Bert Kaplan has positioned himself as being an intermediary. I should say, not very long after that, Bert Kaplan became the intermediary between Ippolito and Caracappa and the Lucchese crime family. And so they put Ippolito and Caracappa on a retainer of $4,000 a month to do these errands for them.
Wait, but so they use them. So they helps out with that, right? That makes sense. But then where does Casso and Mafia get involved?
Right. So I mean, I know this is complicated, and I may not be explaining it very clearly. But so after the Israel Greenwald episode, Ippolito and Caracappa help Kaplan by abducting Israel Greenwald. Now, this whole time, Bert Kaplan has a working relationship with Gaspipe Casso, the underboss of the Lucchese crime family. And
Yeah.
so Kaplan says to Gaspipe, hey, I have these cops and they can do some favor. They can help you out, but you have to go through me. And so, this is the time when Giuliani is using the RICO laws to bust the mob, and Gaspipe Queso, along with everybody else, people are flipping like crazy. And so, of course, he wants these cops to help him. So he puts them on the payroll, but for a long time, he doesn't know who they are because Bert Kaplan keeps everybody compartmentalized and separate.
Okay, so was that a control thing? Was that to protect Casso?
It was to protect everybody.
Got it. And that makes sense.
It was to protect it was to protect everybody, and what's more, it put Bert Kaplan into a position of power because he was the only one who could, pull the strings and make it happen.
Got it. All right. So now they're hooked up. They're hooked up with the mob. As far as you know, okay. So what years were this? This was the 80s, 90s.
Late 80s and early 90s. Yeah. So, okay. Giuliani started to use the RICO laws. When was that? Like, I forget the year when he busted the commission using the RICO laws. It was late 80s when all this started to unfold.
So $4K a month. I'm trying to think about that a second. It's a lot of money, but it's not, right? It's a lot of money for the time. It's probably $8,000 or $10,000 now. It's cash, non-taxed. It's cool to rub elbows with a mobster back then, if you will, right? But then, like, there's a pension consideration. You're standing. These guys were, decorated. So it's kind of weird in that sense, right? So, okay. So which informants, and especially informant hits, were they linked back to?
Well, a whole bunch of them. I mean,
who were some of the more notable or top line, if you don't mind?
Otto Heidel, who was involved with the bypass gang, a burglary crew that was straight out of the script of Ocean's 11. It seems there was a young man named Jimmy Heidel.
Wait, hold on. There's Otto Heidel, and I know Jimmy and Frank Heidel. Otto Heidel is related to the other Heidels?
I'm trying to make this as complicated as possible.
Yeah.
Different spelling.
Okay.
Otto Heidel, the safecracker, is Heidel.
Oh, got it. And then the other Heidels were
Hydel.
And they were also Danny Marino's nephew. Okay, so the safecracker was an informant?
He was an informant for the FBI, and he was busted for loading some stolen merchandise into a truck, and he flipped immediately. His wife looked like Marilyn Monroe, and he was terrified that his wife would be unfaithful to him if he went to prison. So he flipped immediately, and he worked for the FBI. For years.
Interesting.
And Casso passed his name. I'm sorry. The two detectives passed his name along to Queso, and that he was out by Marine Park in Brooklyn, and he came back to his car and found that it was a flat tire. Classic hitman move, right?
Yeah.
Puncture the tire, then they can't get away. He's lying on the ground trying to muscle the tire off, and they shot him. He got up and ran up the street, and they drove up and got him and killed him.
So, and I'm not saying in any way that it was normal. I'm let me preface that, right? But at the time, things were gray. The mob had power, had somebody in the payroll, maybe a local beat cop, maybe a few bucks here and there. but this turned out to be one of the most egregious, along with like Del Vecchio and Scarpa,
Yeah.
and Connolly and Woody Bulger. So my question to you is, did it escalate? Like, so for example, like, were these guys killers? Were there other murders these guys did previous, and like they just kind of shifted over, or did it slowly escalate to being, hey, corrupt cops, and kind of escalated into being like psychopathic killers?
I think more the latter.
Yeah.
They shot a Gambino underboss, Eddie Lino, themselves. They pulled him over on the side of the Belt Parkway and shot him themselves. We don't know of any other case where they committed the actual shooting themselves. Although if you
Oh,
talk
Bobby Borriello, no?
Well, if you talk to detectives about this case, they have suspicions about Borriello and other people. But for the most part, what they were doing is abducting people. In the case of Jimmy Heidel, who I mentioned earlier, they delivered him to Gaspipe Queso because Gaspipe Queso wanted to kill Jimmy Heidel and others. He wanted to kill them himself because he wanted to extract information from.
But hold on. So some of the parts that are fuzzy to me. So first, like the Lucchese's, and probably for a proxy for the Genovese, which I think is another discussion, we're picking off Gambinos one by one. So Eddie Lino, what was the reason for that hit?
Well, I mean, there was a long beef between Gaspipe Queso and Eddie Lino, and it's possible there was an assassination attempt on Gaspipe Queso.
Like when he was eating the ice cream.
He was eating ice cream in his car outside of a strip mall by Mill Basin, and Jimmy Heidel and a few other guys pulled up and tried to shoot him. It's possible. I mean, if you ask some people, they will say that Eddie Lino hit was retribution for that botched assassination attempt. But there was a long beef there.
I heard that, but then I heard like from like a quasi insider that wasn't the case. Okay, then Borriello, at the bare minimum, didn't they case his house?
Yeah, I mean Borriello. There's a long there's a long list of these guys where they.
Well, guys, gotta read the book, by the way. Hold on. Wait, all this preface with you reading the book, Blood and the Badge. But we're trying to get some cursory information to make it interesting for you guys. Go ahead, Michael. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. I mean, just to back up, what they were doing was passing along information about people's whereabouts, who was a rat, where those rats lived, where they might be found, what their involvements were activities were as an informant, and in some cases they abducted these men. In some cases they just passed information along. Yeah. And at least in the case of Eddie Lino, they shot him. They were at one point hired by Gaspipe Queso to assassinate Sammy the Bull Gravano. Ooh. And so they were trailing Gravano around, and they were sitting in their car outside of Gravano's office when another cop came up and just greeted them as an acquaintance and said, "What are you guys doing here?" And that scared them off, and so that assassination obviously never happened.
So what? All right, so they get the $4K a month, and then they get like bonuses. They get like $75K cash for one hit. One of the bigger hits they did. What are the kind of bonuses in their company?
Yeah, they were paid bonuses, and somewhere in there is a question, which is, were they really doing it for the money or not? I spoke to a detective once. I asked him that, and he said, "Yeah, of course they were doing it for the money." I'm not so sure. Eppolito was born into a mafia family, as you mentioned. His father was a Gambino capo. Known as Fat.
He was a capo? I don't know that. I knew he was. I heard he was made. I didn't know he was like in
yeah, he and his brother were they were capos, and they ran a crew and mostly doing like hijacking and gambling and loan sharking. So just the reason I mention is that Ippolito was born into a mafia family. His father was Fat the Gangster. His uncle was known as Jimmy the Clam. His
Hmm.
father was an abusive father. No surprise. He grew up in a violent household. 3 weeks after his father died of a heart attack, Ippolito joined the police academy. He was rebelling against his family. So just to go back to this question about whether they were really doing it for money or not, I mean, I don't know. I think in Ippolito's mind, it was just he wanted to be a mafiosi, but he was also in the police.
Well,
Was he a mafiosi, kind of disguised as a detective, or was it the other way around?
well, so hold on, and I think because by nature, a lot of us tend to be focused on Ippolito as a result, right? What was Caracapa's motivation based off your research?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's harder to know. It's harder to know. He was, I mean, as I mentioned, he was promoted to the major case squad. So he was about as successful as you can be as a detective. So why was he doing this? Well, the men who worked with him at major case say that they noticed that he had like a funny, like almost obsessive way of talking about the mafia.
Yeah.
Um, he had his own criminal background before he came to the police department. He was charged with a felony crime. He had stolen some a lot of construction equipment. The charge was dismissed. He went to Vietnam, came back, and joined the police department. Why was he doing this? I just, I think the money may have been part of it, but I think there's something more deep rooted, which is that he just was trying to get one over on people. I think
Yeah.
that was his motivation, was that he liked the idea of having this secret life.
So, little random question. Were they friends? Like, was Caracappa and Ippolito going to christenings, weddings, parties, or was it strictly a business and more transactional relationship as far as you know?
Well, they were going to those things, but it's kind of hard to picture them as friends because Caracappa was not, he barely drank anything. He would
Yeah,
go
kind of a
home,
quiet
he'd go
guy.
home right after his shift, and I mean, he was kind of famous for going to sleep at like 9:30,
Hmm.
and then coming into work before anybody else. And Ippolito was the opposite. He was the guy who was telling, dirty stories in the bar, like the last one there. When they were paired up as young detectives in a robbery squad in Brooklyn, Caracappa at first came to their boss and said, "I can't work with this guy." And the boss said, "Give it a month, and if you still feel that way, come back to me." Caracappa never came back, and they became best friends and partners. And
Interesting.
and somewhere in that time period, I mean, there's no way we can know, but somewhere in that time period, they formed this criminal alliance. They discovered in each other the inclination to commit these crimes.
Okay, so I don't want to give too much away, and we're almost on the tail end of this. So they got away with it, and then moved. They both moved to Vegas.
Yeah, not only did they both move to Vegas, but they moved to houses across the street from each other in a subdivision. So why did they do that? They did that, I think, because Caracappa wanted to keep an eye on Ippolito so he didn't do anything stupid.
And like I just asking that. I think by that time, the mob is not what it was in you know
Yeah.
in Vegas, but a leopard doesn't change its stripes. Do we know, did Lucchese's have emissaries out there, kind of connected with them, maybe protected them, vice versa? Any mob interaction in your research?
Oh, yeah.
Here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they had any. There isn't any indication that they were engaged in mob activity in Las Vegas, but they were hanging out with the wise guys
Yeah.
there's a place out there called Conti's, which was which was like a social club, and they would go there. They would go there all the time and hang out with these sort of washed up wise guys from New York and Los Angeles.
Interesting. All right. And then they kind of got away with it. Was Casso flipping? Like, how did they how did they get caught?
Yeah. I mean, they got away with this. They got away with this until they didn't.
Yeah.
Eppolito was caught initially when the FBI and the New Jersey State Police raided the home of Rosario Gambino, a Sicilian heroin dealer. And they found, to their surprise, that Gambino had his own police file, or a copy of his police file, in his home. And then they found Eppolito's fingerprints on the file. So it would appear to be a pretty
yeah, but that's not okay. So one, a Sicilian gangster keeping some report that's unique. That's a little weird that they picked that up. I'm not saying it was planted, but that's a little weird. And then number two, Eppolito giving it to said gangster or to somebody who gave it to said gangster. And why would he not be wearing gloves when he printed? I don't know. That sounds a little far-fetched, no?
I mean, I don't think that there was anything in that police file that was particularly sensitive. I think a lot of it was just like, clippings from the New York Post.
It makes it worse.
But yeah, but they found Eppolito's fingerprints on it. Eppolito claimed, those fingerprints were from when I handled the police file initially. But in fact, the fingerprints were on the photocopied copies. So, and then Internal Affairs dismissed the case. And then not only that, but they promoted him to detective second grade. And not only that, but they let him pick whatever precinct he wanted to work in.
So that was the initial kind of rumblings. Well, here's the other part too. Before we get to how they got jammed up specifically, were there's always an aura around them, or they were considered squeaky clean while in uniform?
There was definitely an aura around Eppolito. I mean, as we all know, police and detectives are not supposed to consort with known criminals. But Eppolito, he was hanging out in restaurants, and he was checking in with his uncle, and he was doing favors for them. He was, and I think everybody assumed that he was, involved to some degree with his old family and friends. People definitely had suspicions about it.
All right. So they get out, they had some rumblings, but how do they get, so what was the final nail in the coffin that got him in?
Well, I mean, you mentioned, so gas pipe flipped, and that looked like that would be the end of things for them.
But so this is the part I don't get. Casso flips. When I was a little more into it, I read some of the stuff. He was full of shit. He was full of shit, right? And then there's a theory that they ripped up his agreement, one, because he had like some guard with a paper, which I think is more to it. Stone Sailor, if you could back me up on that, because he worked in a correctional facility, so I don't know why we did a guard with a paper, but we'll get to that. But he was really big on saying, hey, Sammy and I did drug deals. Sammy was a drug dealer. So this is the part I don't get, and I know you're not a lawyer, but unpack this if you can. Casso was not reputable when it came to Sammy. So why was he reputable when it came to the Mafia Cops?
Well, he wasn't reputable, and that was the problem. And the federal prosecutors who had spent all those years trying to get to convict John Gotti, they were scared of gas pipe because he was shooting his mouth off, and they were afraid that he was going to endanger the Gotti conviction by calling Sammy. How is that? So it's like, okay, we don't believe you for Sammy, but we'll believe you for these cops. I just want to see how they pin down these cops. They didn't believe him for the cops. They decided we're not going to have anything to do with Casso. We're going to rip up his plea agreement and send him to Supermax. Goodbye, Casso. And that's exactly what happened until he died of COVID in prison 4 years ago. So, so the FBI and the federal prosecutors, they knew what Eppolito and Caracappa had done, but they really, the most convenient and expedient thing for them was to just have Casso go away. And that's what happened.
So then, I remember the trial, but not vividly. What was kind of the damning evidence of what jammed them up in the trial?
In Eppolito and Caracappa's trial?
Yes, yeah.
Burt Kaplan.
Oh, so he flipped too, right? Yeah.
Burt Kaplan, the guy who nobody thought would flip, eventually flipped, and then it was over for Eppolito and Caracappa.
I remember in Philip DiCarlo's book about Casso, that's right. When Kaplan flipped, I believe A, they let him keep his money, and then B, it's some weird stuff where Burt Kaplan's, it's a long story. I don't want to get into too much, but Burt Kaplan's had like the house, their family house in their name. Mm-hmm. So when Casso went away, and what was his wife's name, Lily or something, he either took it, or she died, and like the kids had no claim to it. So he took like a lot of his assets on the books, and then supposedly part of the reason why she passed was guys were coming to her from the mob, and like after he flipped, saying, "Hey, where's this stuff? What's going on?" She got really nervous and scared, and whatever illness she had, it perpetuated it. But what is your research kind of unpack that part a little bit too? So Kaplan flips, and then
I mean, Kaplan flips. I mean, he was actually flipped by an investigator in the Brooklyn DA's office called Joe Ponzi, and Ponzi had started out as the technician who conducts the the lie detector tests.
Yeah,
and had become a really accomplished and kind of legendary interrogator. And he flipped Kaplan in part by asking him about a guy named Nicky Guido, who was killed.
That was a kid that got killed at the bagel store, right?
No, he wasn't the kid killed in the bagel store. That was Matteo Speranza.
Yes, I'm sorry, but Nicky Guido was killed by mistake.
Killed outside his family home. Innocent kid. He happened to have the same name as a mafia guy named Nicky Guido, and it was just a case of mistaken identity. Eppolito and Caracappa had passed the wrong information to Casso. So anyway, Kaplan, for all of his many crimes and his very dark schemes, I think never got over the murder of this innocent kid on Christmas Day, and that kind of shook him and he flipped. And then later during the trial, Kaplan said, he gave a kind of different account in the trial. He said, I flipped because I was afraid that Eppolito and Caracappa might flip. I'd rather be on the witness stand than at the defense table.
So, okay, I got to figure this out. Okay. I was with somebody who was an older Sicilian guy, and he explained it to me. And ironically, I don't have the Lucchese's at the time as being a very Sicilian faction and very like off the boat, more Americanized, if anything, with like a Muzo and Casso. But he said, kind of in mob parlance and history, that the mafia never forgets. And even like after they kill somebody, they'll kill somebody every 5 or 6 years on the anniversary as a way to really get back to you over and over and over. It's actually the opposite in Italy. They kill you on your birthday. They kill you on Christmas because they want you to not only die, but they want your family to miss you and ruin their Christmas for eternity, right?
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. It's kind of performative. It's about
correct. So if you follow the math, and that was a day off or two between the DeCicco killing and the Borelli killing, do you have any research that spawns that or can link that or anniversary or anything along those lines?
You mean murders that were committed on anniversaries?
So I think the Chico was 86
Sounds
April,
like,
whatever it was, right?
yeah.
And if you look at the Boreali date, and we got some mobologists that probably know the dates offhand in the chat, but I think there was a 5 or 6 year difference almost to the day. Anything come up about that? Because separately, I had this Sicilian guy tell me about this, what they do over there, and then I was kind of matching up the dates with Chico and
I mean,
Boreali.
I don't think nothing comes to mind, and I mean, in this case, I mean, what I want to say is that in this case, they were flailing and they were desperate and they were because of the RICO laws, the Lucchese's were really all of the families, I guess, they were trying to stem the tide of informants.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
Borello's hit I don't fully get because I believe Gotti was in jail already. Gotti was in jail already or no? I think he
yeah,
was
I think so.
so he's in jail already. It's Junior's like right hand. It's Senior's like important guy. They thought the Genovese did it at first, Gervitano, whoever it was, and then they later knew that it was Lucchese's. So, what was the motive behind that hit? And then number two, in your opinion, who studies mob stuff, why didn't Gotti exact revenge? You killed Lino, you killed Borriello, you killed the Chico, and these are all stemming back to Lucchese's. So, first part is what was the motivation for Borriello, and number two, why not exact revenge?
I don't really have a good answer for either one of those. The Borriello one, I'd have to go back and look because there were so many of these murders that I can't keep them straight, and I don't really know why there wasn't brushback or blowback from Gotti's people. The whole thing was like a big effing mess, really. And it was. Organized crime was becoming disorganized in that moment. So my sense for Gas Pipe was not a guy, Gas Pipe was not a guy who thought about these things very much. I think he was a guy who he just wanted somebody to pull the trigger.
Interesting. All right. So how can we get the book, Michael?
The book is out there wherever people buy books. It's Blood in the Badge, and you can get it on Amazon or where your local Barnes and Noble. And I have a website, michaelcannell.com, and you can click through to the buy links there if you care to.
How did you get Nick Pileggi to do a little forward for you, or a little comment?
Yeah, he was a friend of my uncle's, and I have had a little correspondence with him over the years. And God bless him. I had a little email exchange with him, and I asked him if we could get together. He said, "No, I'm in Hollywood. I'm doing some work." And as you probably know, he's like 91 or 92.
Yeah.
So I think he was probably working on Alto Nights, which comes out next month.
Wow, that's a nice testament. It's nice to see that he's supporting.
Yeah, I hope to be working in Hollywood when I'm 92.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead. Any movie or any other rights kind of getting chopped around for this?
There have been some inquiries. I will say I think it's a pretty cinematic story, and it's think about South Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s. It's really kind of a Scorsese backdrop.
Yeah. So, kind of one last question, and depending on who you ask, there obviously was a deterioration of the mafia. Not that there were good people, but they were more powerful, right? And my personal opinion, Casso's beginning of the end. Your research closer to that, Casso and post Casso. When was, in your opinion, your research showed you that the mafia was really declining?
Well, I mean, I think Casso is a really good example of it, like you say, partially because he was a guy who didn't want to follow the old order, right? He made all that money, and partially he made drug money. And I think in my mind, that was kind of the beginning of the end, because it was maybe, I don't know enough about Wall Street to know if it was equivalent to what was happening on Wall Street, but it was like the young guns, they didn't give a shit about the old way of doing things or the code or the honor. They were all about the money. And so I think that hierarchy and structure that had sustained the mob since the 1920s or 30s, it started to fall apart. And gas pipe was kind of the perfect example of that. Interesting.
All right. Listen, Mike Cannell, I appreciate you being here. I'm going to leave it up on Mobsters Inc. because that's more of a mob focus channel. For those checking out the live, it's a rare live. I didn't, Mike and I at the end were just like, hey, let's just go live. Not huge numbers so far, but it's okay because we're happy that people did interact, and we envision it doing better on the replay. Drop a comment below. And Michael, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, Tom, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.